So before I sort of really jump in to what we've done and all of the resources that we've made available, and we'll hopefully answer a lot of questions that have already sort of cropped up today, one of the things I wanted to quickly put my thoughts in on was a question just before the break about sort of the teeth of the regulations, because someone was saying about, there aren't really fines to it anymore, but something we've been discussing and something I discussed with GDS a couple of weeks ago was the interpretation of the regulations that now it quite clearly defines a reasonable adjustment as meeting these regulations and WCAG compliance. So what you've got to then think about is if that is now the definition for reasonable adjustments and can be used with the Equalities Act, as that is what reasonable adjustments are, all it's going to take is not necessarily GDS coming along and auditing your website and coming down on you, because they're taking a really supportive approach. They've been fantastic the entire time we've been working with them to get answers. All it's going to take is individuals sending you an FOI, challenging you on this, saying, where's your accessibility statement, where's your remedial action plan, what are you doing for audits, what are you doing for your students, for your members of staff, how are you improving accessibility? Oh, you're not WCAG compliant, that's a failure to make reasonable adjustments, black and white, there you go. Much easier to pursue an Equalities Act challenge in that way. And also that can then lead to not just the monetary fines, but reputational damage and things. I'm not going to name names, but I'm pretty sure I've seen some stuff recently about universities getting in the news and things for stuff with a blind student. There's at least one example I can think of. That thing could become much more common if it's really easy for students to prove that you haven't been doing what the sort of standard expected levels of work to meet accessibility. So with my two pennies out of the way, let's actually talk about the Digital Accessibility Toolkit now, which loads of people have been working on. Yay! So there have been loads of questions in the room today, and it's been really great, especially that panel session for me, to hear that other people have been on the same journey as us, have been on the same sort of thought paths and have come to the same kind of conclusions. It makes me feel a lot better that we're not just talking rubbish all the time. So we've been doing this for about sort of 2 years now. We started off doing our own separate things, and as Ben said earlier, we came together and started doing shared accessibility statements and shared procurement and all of this other stuff. And in that time, we've written loads of documents and loads of papers and loads of templates and all sorts of other stuff. And I think we're fairly confident in our position with the new regs and with our journey that we're on. We're not saying we're near the end, but we know the direction we want to take. And as part of that journey, we've decided to put all of our templates and learning and thinking about it, all the documentation we've written, etc., online for everyone to use as the start of a collective pool of resource that other people can contribute to as well.
And just to say that this isn't just the Kent show. The Further and Higher Education Digital Accessibility Working Group was originally something that was kind of set up with the sanction of the government digital service and previous incumbents of Richard's role to kind of almost filter or create a means of translating GDS guidance into something that the sector may be able to understand via things like the JISC mail list, and the other way around as well. Because I think certainly further and higher education is as George and I have been seeing from Kent County Council's work and the work at Kent University, they are different things, and I think that the guidance isn't necessarily the same for public sector. I think there is something quite particular about the way that we provide information, the range of formats that we use, and certainly the range of content creators potentially in universities is a subtly different thing. So if we can flash up the list of contributors for this, you'll see it's not just and some of the stuff is the Kent stuff that we've had a go at, and we think people would hopefully find helpful if you are working in a university and you don't already have a particular template for that. But there's people from across Kent County Council, but accessibility experts and the other co-chairs from the FHE door. And a really crucial thing about this, we are not claiming this as anything that's going to completely solve it for anyone. This is a starter for 10, and very much, hopefully, the beginning of something where we could all contribute. So if somebody's got a really excellent guide on, you know, creating this type of accessible document, or a really good review of a particular bit of technology, it could potentially become a platform that we can all share and learn from, and it will grow over time. So it's kind of this session's almost a bit of a call to arms, and you know, trying to see if people think that's a potentially useful way forward.
So I suppose we'll sort of get into some of what we've put up there already now as like version 1, and it's going to continue to grow. We've already got people suggesting stuff they'd like to add. So we've tried to order the contents in a fairly reasonable way for people who are approaching this from different stages. One of the conversations we have all the time, I must have spoken with, you know, more than 30 different councils now about this kind of thing, is trying to explain to them what digital accessibility and inclusion is. Because a lot of them go, oh, inclusion, oh yes, we have an equalities office, it's fine, I'm sure it's all right. They don't get that this is actually going to add more to their workload, that this new requirement for standards and push to improve the accessibility for everyone is a different sort of beast. Ben came up with some really good wording a few weeks ago when we were trying to explain it, that normally when people hear inclusion and switch off and say, oh, it's an equalities thing, the difference with digital accessibility and digital inclusion is that when it comes down to accessibility and the functional usability of all of our services, this isn't the same as inclusion when we're talking about, you know, gender or race or any of those other things, which are more about culture change and personal interaction and things like that. These can actually create mechanical blockers to study or to interacting with a council. You know, if I'm blind and your website is not accessible and all of your services now run through your website, I physically cannot interact with you. You know, whereas being of whichever particular race or religion doesn't necessarily cause you any issue at all with being a diligent student or progressing through your studies. So we've got some stuff there about what is digital accessibility and inclusion, which is very sort of basic intro stuff, shows some common facts through like BBC Media, literacy studies, etc., about the scale of the issue. Digital accessibility regulations, so this is the big one, there's loads of sub-pages under here. We've got some content about the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty, and as Richard sensibly stated this morning, the new regulations don't supersede these in any way, they build and expand on the discussion. And then we've got more content around introducing people to the new regs. So we've got an introduction, we've got, which is probably a controversial title, for what is a website from an accessibility perspective. Disproportionate burden, so obviously a big question mark around this one still about exactly how do you identify disproportionate burden. We think we've come up with a sort of starter for 10 on that, so here's one of the first templates I'm going to show you. With the disproportionate burden, there's a load of stuff in the existing EU directive, there's the information that we've taken from the new regulations for the UK, and there's also quite a good sort of final page on the latest EU accessibility directive that came out this year, which is talking about wider accessibility, not just digital. And what we've done is we've sort of combined all of those bits of content together. I'm going to have to save this now, aren't I? There we go. We've combined all those bits of content together and sort of come up with a disproportionate burden cheat sheet, which covers all the main criteria from that, so all of the costs you might want to think about, and obviously all of those other sort of qualitative things that you're going to have to explain. In my opinion, it seems quite about as much work to be able to say you're disproportionately burdened as it would be to conduct an assessment in the first place. And I've seen some interesting takes on disproportionate burden in some research that I'll talk to you about in a little while. Monitoring and enforcement, we've got whatever is the latest information that GDS has said about how they're going to monitor and enforce this. We've got information about the timelines, again, up there in hopefully a straightforward to understand format. Some information on regulation exemptions. So I know there's been loads of talk already this morning about whether universities are in it or not, and whether it's a moral question about getting people to do it, or we can convince them legally. I don't have the answer for that one, but we've got some stuff in there about what the exemptions say in the regulations and things you might want to think just a little bit more about when looking at it. So one of the things we've put for schools, Richard mentioned this morning that schools and nurseries are exempt, apart from applications relating to essential online administrative processes. If you think about it, for someone to be able to get to that form, complete the form and say, yes, you can take photos of my child on a school field trip or specify meal information, etc., not only does that form have to be accessible, but the entire user journey, including the platform that they've decided to put it on, needs to be accessible. So with the school's exemption thing, it's a bit of a misnomer, because they say it's an exemption, but in fact about 80% of it isn't, and it's only sort of your user-generated blog content that is actually really an exemption when you might think about it. So we've got some stuff there on the new regs that I hope is useful. Quick accessibility checks. So this one was done by Abby. This is a new addition. Oh, and Alistair, sorry. This is a new addition from them on some quick accessibility checks to help you out as well. So GDS have just released some guidance on their disproportionate burden and more basic accessibility checks. This is to sort of build on that and just advise you on if you can't do basic checks, some of the quick checks you might do in addition to using Wave and other online tools to get a quick look. Auditing for digital accessibility. So I know there were people earlier today saying that they just don't have the resources to be able to start auditing all of their websites, or don't necessarily know where to begin in auditing their entire web estate or how to conduct an audit. We've added a load of templates here for how we do it and sort of walked through the process. Prioritising audits was a big thing for us. So I was at Kent County Council, we've got hundreds of websites as well. We've got our main website, we've got services that are provided more specifically to vulnerable members of our community. Should those be prioritised because they have a more significant demographic overlap with people with disabilities? There's a lot of different ways to think about it. So we've tried to sort of condense some of our thoughts there. Thoughts about methods for auditing, whether you do it yourselves, whether you get a third party to do it, whether you can get students to do it if you've got some kind of consultancy or can get them in. One of the bits I'll talk about in a minute is some of the work we've been doing with the School of Computing at the University of Kent to actually embed accessibility as part of the teaching for their curriculum. Managing your audits. So this is the template that we use for managing the audits across our organisations. Hopefully that will be fairly useful to you. It's quite a straightforward spreadsheet. All we're really tracking is system name, where in the organisation it sits, what kind of system it is, any kind of test logins, and then just for everything we're having date first audited, who audited it, passed, partially met, not met for the criteria. We also include 3 mobile criteria as well, which is about single directional scrolling, whether it has a mobile dedicated view, things like that, because we think that's really important. Links to the reports, links to the technical breakdown of where things go wrong, and audit results. We've also got additional columns for comments and whether they've completed training and whether they have an accessibility statement as well, because there's a lot of discussion about, do you need an accessibility statement for just one domain at a time, or can you have an entire organisational accessibility statement? But I'll come on to that in a second, I'm getting ahead of myself.
If I can just chip in, I think what was interesting for us working with Kent County Council was that Council were very, very strong on auditing, at the action administration of doing an audit and documenting it, as you've seen. So a lot of those documents are originally KCC models that we then started to use with training our students. what was the university was quite strong in was much more around the kind of cultural stuff, you know, and the training. And I was talking to Claire earlier, but some of the training I mentioned was the digital accessibility MOOC from Southampton that we squashed down into an hour that gives the key things about, you know, lectures, seminars, accessible documents, that was done with Abby and E.A. Jaffin at Southampton. That's on here as well. So it's not just the purely administrative stuff of doing audits. There's also that more, you know, how might we influence the cultural stuff as well. And all of that's open to everyone to be able to use. And I think when we did it, the language was open enough that you would be able to use it with your academics without it being all like, well, we don't have that system here. You know, it's pretty generic.
Sorry, I feel like I'm just talking quite dryly about all of this. I should be really more enthused because this has solved a lot of our problems. You know, when people come to us and ask, do we have an answer for this? Someone's asked about it. We're feeling much more confident in that we can actually say yes at the moment because we've got all of this. So I won't show you every single template in here. I'll leave you to go and actually have a little bit of a browse. But one of our favourite ones, which I think you will all like, is this one, which is our main audit template. So, standard sort of table of contents, intro, what is accessibility, the kinds of compliance. I've now got another ISO compliance to add to it because someone mentioned one today that I wasn't aware of. I think it was 3007-1, something like that. How we're evaluating, the standards we're using, what WCAG means, then a nice long table which goes through all of the different WCAG points and says how we fail and all of that. And then my favourite stuff, which is the bit I love feeding back to people, is this bit. And this is really, really useful for us as well. When people come a knock in and say, have you done this? Where are you at with this? What's the situation? Before we get into, you know, our actual remedial action plan about how we're tackling each and every one of these WCAG points, is we've got this nice sort of two-page summary. Functional audit. What's the results for WCAG? How many have they passed? How many have they partially met? How many do we need to fix? Same with the mobile audit. And then in there, as a requirement, we know whether they've got an accessibility statement or not and whether that's now compliant as well. So if anyone asks that, we've got the results. A nice little final results excerpt and then a nice little bit of wording for remedial action for this is what we're doing, and then a very long disclaimer to say that please don't particularly complain at me if something goes wrong. That's been really useful, and that's gone through 4 or 5 iterations now. We started off with something a lot more, not necessarily basic, it hasn't really grown over that time, but it's just been refined as more and more questions have come up because we've been using that template in all of its varied versions for about 2 years. So I'm quite happy with it at the moment that it should answer any questions. And you can give that to a manager of a website and say, there you go, that's your report, go away, speak to your developers. That and the accompanying technical spreadsheet is what they will need to be able to hopefully get on with this. And that is what you feed back. You've got your answers, that's how compliant you are. Make sure you go away and do your remedial action plan. Working with suppliers, so apologies again for interrupting the panel with my long rant about CCS and frameworks. We've got some information on working with suppliers. Again, glad I'm not the only one who's had mixed responses from suppliers. Some have been great and gone, oh, this is fantastic, we can get on the boat with this because they're keen to work with us and collectively learn about accessibility, and then we can sell that because we know what we're talking about. And I've had other suppliers say, and if I don't make it accessible? It's like, well, your contract's up for renewal in 6 months, so I'd really consider what you're saying. And it has been there.
George and I were asked to help with some other local procurement, and the answer to the accessibility question was, it's as accessible as the browser you choose to use with the product. We're like, I don't really know what that means. I'm still not sure I know.
I've got some good examples about that in a minute. Some good examples of people saying it's the browser.
But just to say, to get to the toolkit, it's LexDis, Lexdis.
I've just tweeted it on the hashtag, which is
perfect.
new access regs, which I forgot to mention at the beginning of the Another lesson learned.
And when you land on the Lexis page, you will see there's a digital accessibility tab right at the top. That's the one to choose. But I'm pretty sure we've got, contact us, share your ideas, have you got a great template for this? That kind of thing is really what we want. We'd love this to kind of grow, and I think that would help. Hopefully this will help Richard and the GDS team in terms of that, the sector almost helping make our mind up about what we think those common benchmarks should be, and I think surely there's some reassurance for us all in that.
Yeah. Sorry, we could clearly, literally talk for hours about this, and I could bore you all to death. But I'll run through the rest of the titles, and then I'll do my other bit, which is slightly more interesting. So we've got accessibility and procurement, loads of stuff there, wording for contracts, tenders, all of that, statements, loads of good stuff in there, building your approach to digital accessibility, engaging with the wider community. So we've got loads of links in there for the JISC mailing list and FHE.org and loads of other stuff.
Kent, we've got the Kent Digital Accessibility Working Group, which is, I call it Deputy Dog, by the way.
Embedding skills for the future, which I can't go into now, but we're into our second year of teaching accessibility as part of the School of Computing at the University of Kent. So we've got it in year 1 and year 3 of their courses, which is great. Whole thing on intranets and VLEs, I'm sure that's going to be a very popular page. Staff guides, which include loads of other things. The third-party content guidance, particularly interesting. We've got a whole matrix, which nobody's been able to break yet, so the first person who can, I will give you a special title on the contributors page for being the first person to break it. And then, I think it's now broken. No, there we go. Resource quick links, a page to just all of the templates and stuff that are up there, which I hope. Of course it would go slow now when I'm on a tiny time limit. Loads of templates, loads of resources, cheat sheets, other presentations and stuff. Please go and have a look. If you've got stuff, please let us know. We'd love for you to contribute to it as well. Right, I've now got a few slides which hopefully will be far more interesting than me going through templates. I've been doing some research on accessibility statements across the UK because in my free time I am really, really that sad, apparently. And I was a bit annoyed this morning because Richard stole the sort of first 3 slides of my presentation with the exact same content. So this is what the regs say about accessibility statements. This is when and what, which you've all seen this morning. These are the results of some of my research. So I have now personally sat down and looked at 601 organisations across the UK, which is every local authority at district and county level, all 131 universities, unless I've missed any, 48 police forces, and all 53 fire and rescue services. Next, I'm going to do the 800 combined NHS and colleges, which is about 400 each. So, where are we at? Out of the 601, 23 organisations have compliance statements at the moment, as far as I can tell. So we've got some way to go, but I'm going to do this again after the 23rd, where I'm hoping for a much more green map. So the map on the left, green is compliant, the yellow is partial statements, and red is no statements. So you can see we've got a bit of work to do, but as I say, after the 23rd, should be much more green, definitely. I've got complete faith. On LexDis, all of this stuff's available as well. I haven't broken the partials down into good, partial and poor attempts yet, just because I want to make sure that nobody's going to get offended. But partial really incorporates quite a wide range of things. It could be not technically compliant with the regs, but says a lot of good stuff and is quite helpful for users, so they deserve a bit of a good attempt. And then there are some, which I'm going to show you in a minute, that definitely deserve the poor label. I've got some percentages there, so we're at about 3.8% compliance uptake at the moment. Again, after the 23rd, I'm going to be much more happy to show some of these figures, I'm sure. And also, if people aren't aware, WebAIM has the brilliant Wave accessibility tool. It's been mentioned already a couple of times today. They've also recently done the WebAIM Million, which is an assessment of the top 1 million websites, the accessibility of their homepage. So one of the things I've done, because they don't give a nice ranking list, you have to search each individual website. I've searched all 601 individual websites and put all their rankings in the map and in the spreadsheet, which you can download on Nextdisk. So you can see where you're at and compare yourselves to others if you really want to make yourself feel
and potentially
happy.
identify partnerships, you know, like and it's super helpful doing the partnership model that we've had, because the amount of shared, you know, avoiding duplication of effort was extraordinary. I think we've come a long way, much more than we would have done on our own, and given us that reassurance, you know, that we have access to Kent County Council's legal teams, for example. So maybe that's something else you could get from this.
I should mention with WebAIM stats, lower score is better because it means you're a higher rank, effectively.
Errors.
Yeah, fewer errors. So the reason I collected those is because I wanted to see whether there was any correlation between people having a better statement and being overall more accessible on their website. Although there does seem to be some correlation with what I would class as better statements, does tend towards lower scores for WebAIM, which is better. Each individual example is so varied, I don't necessarily think you could draw any kind of causation or link between that. So university results, because I'm very aware of time, 6 compliance statements, 82 partial and 43 no statements. There are all the stats there, and it's all in the notes and everything, so it all should work with screen readers, so I'm sure you can all go through those in your own time, because I wanted to get on to some examples, yay! So I'm going to go with a bit of a good, bad and ugly theme here, so bear with me. So on the good side, these are common traits that I think I've seen through good statements and compliance statements, and this is also very much reflected in what GDS have put in their sample statement, which is including that specific legal wording, including those contact and escalation points to the ASS and the HRC, including your known issues and the workarounds that you have in place, the accessible alternatives, including information on how you've measured compliance, so saying whether you're looking at it yourselves, third parties are looking at it, just tell people how you're monitoring, what you're doing to improve accessibility, any exemptions and disproportionate burdens, and then there's a link there to GDS's great guidance. One of the things I would say, if you're going to go and use GDS's sample accessibility statement, it contains all of the building blocks for what you need to make a brilliant compliance statement. Do not copy and paste it, right? The reason is they do give sample examples, including saying disproportionate burden because we found it too hard to do a skipped content button, which is a WCAG A point, so it's supposed to be one of the easier ones, right? That is fine if you could actually prove that as a disproportionate burden. That's fine example text from GDS, but I've seen some people copy and paste that particular section, and then when I asked them where their disproportionate burden assessment was, they said, what disproportionate burden assessment? And it's like, well, that's what you get for copy and pasting without looking. So some of the bad, this is fun. Some of the bad statements I've seen have been really quite poor. No get in touch information, no mention of standards, no guidance or assistance, mentioning of WCAG 1, which is from 1999, mentioning of the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995, not necessarily a failure, unless you are in England, which is where all of these people that are mentioning it are. All of the councils or universities or whoever that have mentioned it aren't under those regs anymore. They've been superseded by the Equality Act. Sometimes it's really difficult to find. I've actually found some by going through direct links because you can't find it in search or any other navigation. And heavily focused on browser, which the prevailing attitude for that kind of poor statement is if you've got an accessibility problem, it's because you don't know what you're doing and your browser doesn't work. It's not any problem with our website. And it's just, you know, a mind-boggling attitude. And then we've split them out into 3 separate slides, cool. Sorry, I know I'm going over time. I'll show you, probably these 2 is better. These are the complete accessibility statements, genuinely, from 2 websites that I've looked at. So example 3 is, all modern browsers allow you to change colours and font sizes. We've tried to create a site which doesn't get in the way when you change these settings. That's it for their statement, right? And also, the team behind this website hopes that whoever needs it to use it can do so easily.
I like hope.
Fantastic.
We really hope
What-
it is. No
The
idea.
worst one, which I can't put on there because it's actually blank, was an entirely blank accessibility statement. They had the page, it was there, you can go onto it, it's blank. You scroll all the way down to the bottom of this blank page, and then right at the bottom, they've got a, was this web page helpful? Yes, no. And then this one, this is my favourite thing to love to hate. This is genuinely on a website out there in the UK. This is guidance for the blind. They have a separate one for partially sighted. So this says, I am blind. They own up to the fact that you'll lose your independence by doing this because you'll need a family member to help you. And then the advice they give on how to use their screen reader on site is by using a picture for the blind, not partially sighted, which is why I said they've got a separate one, that then has two poorly drawn rings around it. The picture has no alt text, obviously. And then, if you want to use their on-site screen reader, it's not navigable by keyboard, so you can't even get to it. Fantastic. That's it. I know I've run over time. I'm really, really sorry. Find out more on the toolkit. Fantastic.